The smell of fried onions and old coffee was the first thing that hit her every single morning. It was a sharp, salty smell that stuck to her clothes and her hair, no matter how many times she washed them. Maya no, let's call her Sam walked into the diner, pulling the strap of her apron tighter around her waist. The diner was a small place with checkered floors and bright neon lights that hummed even when they were turned off. It was busy, as usual. The lunch crowd was already starting to gather, and the sound of chatter and clinking silverware filled the air. Sam walked behind the counter and tied her apron strings in a quick knot. She looked at her reflection in the shiny metal toaster near the prep station. Her eyes looked tired, with dark circles under them. She splashed some cold water on her face from the sink in the back, hoping it would wake her up. She had been working here for 3 years, ever since she moved to the city. The rent was high, and the tips were okay, but most days, it felt like she was just running on a treadmill, moving fast but not getting anywhere. "Order up, table 4. The cook shouted from the grill, slamming a metal bell. Sam grabbed the plates. They were hot, burning her fingertips slightly through the thin fabric of the napkin she used to hold them. She balanced 3 plates in her left arm and carried a mug of coffee in her right hand. It was a trick she had learned early on, how to carry too much without dropping anything. She weaved through the crowded tables, muttering "excuse me" and coming through as people shifted their chairs to let her pass. She dropped off the food at table 4, forcing a smile. The customers barely looked up from their phones. They just nodded and started eating. Sam turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her feet aching inside her sneakers. She paused for a moment near the large window that looked out onto the busy street. The sun was shining brightly, and people were walking past with shopping bags and strollers. They looked like they had places to go, people to see. Sam felt a pang of jealousy, but she quickly pushed it down. She had tables to wipe down and drinks to refill. As she walked past the back corner of the diner, she slowed down. It was the quietest spot in the whole place, mostly because it was hidden behind a large plastic plant. That's where the piano sat. It wasn't a grand piano or anything fancy. It was an old upright piano with a wood finish that had faded over the years. The corners were chipped, and one of the legs was slightly shorter than the others, so it wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. Most of the time, it just sat there, collecting dust. The management used the top of it as a storage shelf. There were usually stacks of extra napkins, a box of plastic straws, and sometimes a pile of stained menus resting on the closed lid. But Sam loved that piano. She loved it because it was the only thing in this noisy, chaotic place that reminded her of where she came from. When Sam was a little girl, her house was always filled with music. Her mother used to play the piano in the living room every Sunday afternoon. Sam would sit on the bench next to her, watching her mother's hands fly across the keys. Her fingers were long and elegant, dancing over the black and white ivory. They played songs from the radio, classical pieces, and silly nursery rhymes. It was the happiest time of the week. The house felt warm and safe when the music played. Then, things changed. Money got tight. Her mother got sick. The bills piled up higher than the roof. One day, when Sam was 16, she came home from school and saw a strange truck parked outside. 2 men were carrying the piano out of the living room. Her mother was standing in the hallway, not crying, just looking empty. "We need the money, Sam," her mother had said. Her voice sounded flat, like a record that had been scratched too many times. "I'm sorry." Sam didn't say anything. She just watched until the piano was loaded onto the truck and driven away. The living room felt huge and echoey after that. She stopped playing. She stopped listening to music. She focused on getting a job, helping her mom pay the bills, and eventually, moving to the city to find better work. She traded the keyboard for a serving tray. Now, standing in the diner, Sam stared at the old upright in the corner. She reached out and brushed a layer of dust off the lid. "You gonna wipe that down or just stare at it?" a voice called out. Sam jumped. It was the manager, counting cash at the register. "Sorry, on it," Sam said. She grabbed a spray bottle and a rag from under the counter. She walked over to a nearby booth where a family had just left. There was a mess of crumbs and spilled soda on the table. She sprayed the cleaner and started wiping in circles. In the middle of cleaning, a customer walked into the diner. He was an older man, wearing a tweed jacket and a beret. He didn't look like the usual lunch crowd. He carried a briefcase and looked around the room with a serious expression. He sat down at a small table near the window, ordered a tea, and then pulled out a small notebook. He didn't eat. He just wrote and looked around. About 20 minutes later, the man stood up. But instead of leaving, he walked over to the corner with the piano. He moved the stack of napkins to the floor and sat down on the bench. He opened the lid. The entire diner seemed to pause for a second. The cook even stopped banging on the metal pans for a moment. The man placed his hands on the keys. He pressed down. A loud, jarring chord rang out because the piano was so out of tune. A few customers winced and covered their ears. But the man didn't seem to care. He adjusted the bench, closed his eyes, and began to play properly. He wasn't a concert pianist. He missed a few notes, and the tempo was a bit shaky, but it was real music. It was a slow, sad melody that seemed to float above the noise of the coffee machine. It sounded like a rainy day, even though the sun was shining outside. Sam stopped wiping the table. She froze with the rag in her hand, listening. The notes hung in the air. The D minor, the C sharp, the deep, low bass notes. She watched the man's hands. They looked just like her mother's hands. They moved with a purpose, pressing the keys down with a gentle touch. For a moment, Sam wasn't in the diner anymore. She wasn't holding a dirty rag. She was back in her living room. She could smell the roast chicken her mother used to cook. She could feel the soft velvet of the piano bench under her legs. She could hear her mother humming along to the music. Her chest felt tight. It was a physical ache, right in the middle of her ribs. She realized how much she missed it. She missed the feeling of creating something beautiful. She missed the vibration of the strings humming against her fingertips. Serving food was nice, people needed to eat, but feeding someone's hunger was different from feeding their soul. She felt like a part of her had been asleep for a long time, and now it was trying to wake up. The song only lasted a few minutes. The man finished with a final, low chord that faded into silence. He took his hands off the keys, closed the lid, stood up, and put the napkins back on top. He paid for his tea at the counter and walked out, without ever saying a word to anyone. The noise of the diner rushed back in. The cook started shouting orders again. The customers went back to talking on their phones. The magic of the music was gone, just like that. Sam stood there for a long time. The table she was supposed to be cleaning was forgotten. She looked down at her own hands. They were red and rough from the hot water and cleaning chemicals. Her nails were cut short because it was easier to work that way. She wondered if these hands could still play. She wondered if she even remembered how to read the notes. She looked around the room. The manager was in the office. The other waitresses were busy in the kitchen. Nobody was watching her. Sam walked over to the piano. She didn't sit down. She just stood in front of it. She reached out and touched the white keys. They were cool and smooth. There was a sticky spot near the middle where someone had spilled soda, but she didn't wipe it off. She just rested her fingers there, pressing down a single key. A flat, dull note sounded. It wasn't a beautiful song. It was just one noise in a busy restaurant. But to Sam, it sounded like the beginning of something. It sounded like a voice that hadn't spoken in 10 years finally clearing its throat. Sam. Table 7 needs refills. A voice yelled from the kitchen. Sam pulled her hand back like she had touched a hot stove. She quickly spun around and grabbed the coffee pot. Coming. She shouted back. She hurried away from the corner, her heart beating faster than it should. The ache in her chest was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a pang of hunger. Not for food, but for the music. As she poured coffee for the man at table 7, she smiled. It was a real smile, not the fake one she used for tips. She looked over at the piano one last time. It was just sitting there, covered in napkins, waiting for her to come back. The day seemed to drag on forever after that old man left the diner. The rush of lunch customers slowed down to a trickle, replaced by the lonely, quiet hours of the mid-afternoon. The sun moved across the floor, making long shadows under the tables. Sam wiped the same counter for the third time, her mind not really on the task. She kept hearing that one note she had played earlier. It kept echoing in her head, competing with the sound of the blender and the clinking of spoons. When her shift finally ended, the clock on the wall read 4 p.m. She untied her apron and hung it on the hook in the break room, feeling the weight of the day lift off her shoulders. Her feet throbbed inside her sneakers, a dull ache that started in her heels and went all the way up to her knees. Usually, this was the time she would grab her bag, put on her headphones to block out the world, and walk straight to the bus stop to go home and sleep. But today, she didn't move toward the exit. She walked back out onto the floor of the diner. The lunch crowd was gone. The only people left were a couple of students sharing a plate of fries in the corner and a man in a business suit typing furiously on a laptop. The air smelled of cleaning solution and stale coffee. The place felt bigger when it was empty, almost peaceful. Sam looked around nervously. She checked the kitchen doorway. The cooks were cleaning the grill, banging metal pans loudly and laughing at a joke she couldn't hear. She looked toward the front. The manager was in his small glass office, the door shut, his face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen. He looked busy, probably going over the receipts for the day. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her toward the back of the room. It felt like she was sneaking into a place she wasn't allowed to be, even though she worked here. With every step, her heart beat a little harder against her ribs. She felt a mix of fear and excitement, a tight knot forming in her stomach. She reached the large plastic plant that hid the corner table from the rest of the room. There it was. The old upright piano. It looked sad sitting there in the shadows. The top of it was cluttered with stacks of paper napkins, a container of plastic silverware, and a dusty box of sugar packets. It looked more like a shelf than an instrument. Sam stood in front of it for a moment, just looking. She reached out and touched the wood. It was rough to the touch, scratched up from years of people bumping into it with trays and bags. She glanced over her shoulder again. Nobody was watching. Slowly, carefully, she took the stack of napkins off the top and set them on the floor. Then the silverware. Then the sugar. She cleared the space until the piano was just a piano again. She pulled the bench out. It made a terrible screeching sound against the tile floor. Right. Sam froze. She held her breath, waiting for someone to yell at her. A student in the corner looked up for a second, headphones on, then went back to his fries. The manager didn't look up from his computer. The coast was clear. She sat down on the bench. It was hard and cold. She was so close to the keys now that she could see the dust trapped in the cracks between the ivory and the wood. She could see the crumbs stuck in the felt below the keys. It was messy, but to her, it was beautiful. She placed her hands on her knees. Her palms were sweating. She rubbed them on her jeans, trying to dry them off. I don't know if I can do this, she thought. It's been 10 years. She remembered the day the piano was taken from her house. She remembered promising herself she wouldn't hurt like that again. She had built a wall around that part of her heart, telling herself that music was for other people, not for waitresses who lived paycheck to paycheck. But sitting here, with the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the background, she felt that wall starting to crack. She took a deep breath. She lifted her hands and hovered them over the keyboard. They felt heavy and clumsy, not elegant like the old man's hands. Her fingers were short, her nails cut down to the quick. She pressed down a key with her right thumb. It was a middle C. Bing. The sound was clear, but it rang out into the empty room, sounding very lonely. It hung in the air for a second and then faded away. Sam didn't run away. She didn't stop. She pressed another key. Then another. She was just playing notes at first, trying to find her footing. Her memory was rusty. It was like trying to speak a language she hadn't used in a decade. The words were there, buried deep in her brain, but they were hard to reach. But her fingers remembered things her mind didn't. Muscle memory took over. Suddenly, her left hand found a chord. A minor chord. It sounded sad and dark. Then her right hand found a melody. It was a simple song, an old folk song her mother used to hum. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't fast. It was slow and a little shaky, full of mistakes. She hit a wrong note, a sour E that clashed with the rest, but she didn't stop. She just corrected it and kept going. As the song grew, the noise of the diner seemed to disappear. The clatter of the kitchen faded away. The sound of the traffic outside vanished. It was just Sam and the vibrations coming up through the bench and into her body. She felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't from the cold air conditioning. It was a feeling of release. She closed her eyes. She saw her mother's hands again. She saw the sunlight coming through the window of her childhood home. She felt the sadness of the last 10 years pouring out of her fingertips and into the keys. Every rude customer, every unpaid bill, every lonely night in the small apartment, it was all in the music. The piano was taking the weight off her shoulders. She played for maybe 10 minutes. It felt like 10 seconds. She played until her hands actually started to cramp up. She didn't realize she was crying until a tear splashed onto the back of her hand. She quickly wiped it away with her sleeve, sniffing loudly. She stopped playing, letting the last chord fade into silence. She sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, the silence rushing back in louder than before. Her heart was hammering in her chest. She felt exhausted, but also incredibly light, like she could float away. Then, she heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor in the main dining room. Sam's eyes snapped open. Panic hit her like a splash of cold water. She realized what time it was. She realized where she was. She jumped up from the bench, knocking it back another inch. The screeching sound seemed deafening. She looked around wildly. The manager's office door was opening. Adrenaline kicked in. She grabbed the stack of napkins from the floor and threw them haphazardly back onto the top of the piano. Then the silverware. Then the sugar box. She didn't care if it was messy. She just had to hide it. She had to hide what she had done. She felt like a child who had broken a vase and was trying to glue it back together before her parents got home. She pushed the bench under the piano with her foot, not caring where it landed. She grabbed her bag from the counter, slinging it over her shoulder. "Hey, Sam, you're still here," the manager's voice called out from across the room. He was walking toward the front to unlock the door for the evening staff. Yeah. Just leaving," Sam shouted back. Her voice cracked. She tried to sound normal, but she was breathless. She didn't look back at the piano. She couldn't. She walked quickly toward the front, keeping her head down, clutching the strap of her bag so hard her knuckles turned white. She pushed past the manager, mumbling a quick "see you tomorrow," and pushed out the glass front door into the late afternoon sun. Once she was outside, the noise of the city assaulted her: cars honking, people talking, sirens wailing. It was a stark contrast to the quiet bubble she had just left inside. She leaned against the brick wall of the building for a second, taking a deep breath of the warm air. She looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly. But as she looked down at her fingertips, she saw the dust from the piano keys settled on the pads of her fingers. She didn't wipe it off. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt like a musician again. It was terrifying, but it was also the most alive she had felt in a very long time. She pushed off the wall and started walking toward the bus stop, but she walked a little faster than usual, eager to get home and think about what had just happened. She knew she shouldn't go back. She knew it was risky. But deep down, she knew she would be back there tomorrow. 3 days passed, and they felt like the longest 3 days of Sam's life. Every shift at the diner was a battle. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and the customers seemed ruder than usual. A woman at table 6 had yelled at her because the soup was lukewarm, even though it was steaming hot. A man at the counter had snapped his fingers at her to get more cream, treating her like she was invisible. Usually, Sam could just let it roll off her back like water off a duck. She would smile politely, fix the problem, and move on. But this week, she felt thin-skinned, like her nerve endings were exposed. Every little comment stung. The only thing keeping her going was the memory of the music. She kept hearing that minor chord she had played in her head. It played on a loop while she mopped the floors. It hummed in her ears while she counted out her tips at the end of the night. It was a secret energy source, a tiny battery in her heart that was keeping her charged. On Thursday afternoon, the diner was mostly empty. It was a gray, cloudy day outside, which made the inside of the restaurant feel dim and cozy. Sam was wiping down the sugar caddy near the coffee machine when she noticed him. He was sitting in his usual spot by the window. It was the older man, the one who had played the piano a few days ago. He had on the same tweed jacket and a gray scarf, even though it wasn't that cold outside. He was drinking his tea with his pinky finger sticking out, just like before. He was reading a paperback book, looking very relaxed. Sam felt her face get hot. She suddenly felt guilty. Had he seen her playing the other day? Did he know she had touched the piano? She felt like she had stolen something, even though she hadn't. She turned her back to him, pretending to organize the straws. "Miss," a voice called out from behind her. Sam flinched. She took a deep breath, put on her server face, and turned around. It was the older man. He wasn't looking at his book anymore. He was looking right at her. "More tea, sir?" she asked, walking over with the pot. "Please," he said. He watched as she poured the hot liquid into his cup. The steam rose up between them. "I couldn't help but notice something the other evening," he said quietly. Sam's hand shook, and a little bit of tea splashed onto the saucer. "Oh," she said, trying to sound innocent. "Was the service too slow?" He chuckled softly. It was a kind, dry sound. "No, the service was fine. I left my phone here and had to come back for it about 10 minutes after my shift ended." The place was quiet. Sam froze. She set the teapot down on the table with a clatter. She knew exactly where this was going. She felt like she was in trouble, like she was a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar. She just hoped he wouldn't tell the manager. She couldn't lose this job. She needed the money. "I heard you," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was gentle. "On the piano. You were playing that folk song. The one in a minor." Sam stared at him. She didn't know what to say. She felt a lump forming in her throat. I was just fooling around," she stammered. "I know I'm not supposed to touch it. I'm sorry. Please don't tell the boss. I really need this job." She was rambling, her words tumbling out over each other. She was looking down at her shoes, waiting for him to get mad or to lecture her about rules. "I'm not going to tell anyone," the man said. He took a sip of his tea. "You have a very nice touch. It was a bit rusty, sure. You missed the transition in the second verse. But your phrasing, it was lovely. It sounded like you meant it." Sam looked up. Her eyes were wide. Nobody had talked to her about music in 10 years. Nobody knew she even played. Hearing this stranger analyze her playing felt strange, but also amazing. It was like he had seen a part of her soul that she kept hidden away. "Thank you," she whispered. "I haven't played in a long time. I used to play when I was a kid. But I stopped." "Life gets in the way," the man said, nodding his head wisely. "It has a habit of doing that. I used to play quite a bit myself, back when I was younger. I had dreams of being a concert pianist. I went to school for it and everything." Sam looked at his hands. They were wrinkled and spotted with age, but they looked strong. "Really, what happened?" "I got hungry," he said simply. "And then I got married. And then we had children." Suddenly, practicing scales for 6 hours a day didn't seem as important as putting food on the table. "So, I got a job in an office. I played less and less. One day, I realized I hadn't touched a keyboard in 5 years." Sam felt a strange connection to him. It was like looking into a mirror that showed the future. She understood exactly what he meant. The bills, the rent, the constant need to survive, it slowly squeezed the passion out of you until you were just a machine going through the motions. "But," the man continued, setting his cup down, "I regret it. I have a good life, a wonderful family. But I regret letting the music die. I think about that every day." He reached into the pocket of his tweed jacket. He pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It looked like a flyer or a pamphlet. He smoothed it out on the table and slid it over toward Sam. "Take this," he said. Sam picked it up. It was a bright yellow flyer with black letters printed on it. It read, "The Blue Note Lounge, Open Mic Night. Every Tuesday. Sign up at 7 p.m. All musicians welcome." At the bottom of the flyer, there was a picture of a grand piano. It looked shiny and new, nothing like the beat-up old upright at the diner. "I went there last month," the man said. "I played. It was terrifying. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the music sheet. But I did it. And when I finished, people clapped. Not because I was amazing, but because I was sharing something real." Sam looked at the paper in her hands. The edges were soft from being in his pocket. Open mic night. The words seemed to jump off the page. "I can't do this," she said, shaking her head. She pushed the paper back toward him. "I'm not a real musician. I just play for fun. I'm a waitress." "That's it?" The man pushed the paper back. "You are a waitress who plays with soul. That makes you a musician. You have a voice, Sam. You shouldn't hide it behind a tray of food." He knew her name. She hadn't told him her name. Then she realized he must have heard the manager call her that earlier. "The piano at the lounge is beautiful," he said. "It's a real Steinway. It stays in tune. It deserves to be played by someone who actually loves it." He stood up, putting a few dollars on the table for the tea. "Think about it. Next Tuesday is in 5 days." He picked up his book and his briefcase. He gave her a small nod and walked toward the glass exit. He pushed the handle and walked out into the afternoon, blending in with the crowd on the sidewalk. Sam stood there by the table, holding the yellow flyer. She looked at the date. Tuesday. That was her day off. She looked around the diner. The manager was yelling at the dishwasher, and the other waitress was complaining about a tip. The air smelled like burnt toast and floor wax. She looked down at the flyer again. It felt dangerous. It felt like holding a lit match. If she went, and she played badly, she would be humiliated. But if she didn't go, she felt like she would regret it forever, just like the old man said. She carefully folded the flyer and tucked it deep into the front pocket of her jeans. She patted it to make sure it was there. It felt like a secret treasure. For the rest of her shift, she walked a little differently. She didn't just feel like a waitress anymore. She felt like a musician with a gig coming up, even if she wasn't sure she had the courage to show up. For the next 2 days, the yellow flyer sat on Sam's small kitchen table, weighing more than a stack of bricks. Every time she walked past it, her heart would do a little flip. It was just a piece of paper, some cheap ink printed on bright yellow cardstock, but it felt like a loaded gun sitting in the middle of her apartment. Tuesday was her day off, which was usually the only day she could breathe. But this Tuesday felt different. The silence in her apartment wasn't peaceful, it was noisy. It was filled with doubts and fears that shouted louder than the diner during the lunch rush. Sam paced around her small living room. She looked at her hands again. They were a mess from work. The skin on her fingertips was peeling from the constant washing of dishes and handling hot food. There was a small burn mark on her wrist from a pizza pan last week. She tried to flex her fingers, imagining them flying over the keys of a grand piano. They felt stiff. They felt like hands that carried trays, not hands that made art. "What are you thinking?" she said aloud to the empty room. Her voice sounded small. "You're going to embarrass yourself." You're going to get up there and freeze. She sat down on the edge of her couch and put her head in her hands. The doubt was like a heavy, wet blanket. It was suffocating. She remembered the way the customers treated her at the diner. They looked right through her. To them, she was just a person who brought coffee and cleared plates. If she went to this open mic night and played badly, she would just be a joke. A waitress who thought she was a star. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from her landlord reminding her that rent was due in 3 days. The rent. That was the real world. That was the gravity that kept her feet on the ground. Music didn't pay the rent. Tips paid the rent. Playing scales didn't put food in the fridge. Sam stood up angrily and marched over to the kitchen table. She grabbed the flyer, crumpling it in her fist. She was going to throw it in the trash. She was going to go back to bed, sleep until her shift tomorrow, and forget this crazy idea. She held the crumpled ball over the trash can. Her arm hovered there. But she couldn't let go. Her fingers refused to open. She closed her eyes and saw the old man's face. She saw the way he looked when he talked about regret. I regret letting the music die. The words echoed in her mind. If she threw this away now, would she be him in 40 years? Would she be an old woman drinking tea in a diner, wishing she had just taken one chance? Slowly, Sam lowered her hand. She smoothed the flyer out on the table, trying to flatten the wrinkles. She looked at the clock. It was 6:30 p.m. The show started at 7 o'clock. Her heart kicked into high gear. Panic started to rise in her chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Just go. Just go watch. You don't have to play. You can just sit in the back and listen." She went into her bedroom and opened her closet. She didn't have any fancy musician clothes. She had work uniforms, jeans, and t-shirts. She dug through the piles until she found a dark blue skirt she hadn't worn in years and a clean white blouse with buttons down the front. It was the nicest thing she owned. She put it on and looked in the mirror. She looked different. She looked like she was going somewhere important. She brushed her hair and put on a little bit of lip gloss. Then, she grabbed her guitar case from the top of the closet. Wait, she didn't have a guitar. She had put her old sheet music inside an old keyboard case years ago to keep it safe. It had been sitting gathering dust ever since. She threw the strap over her shoulder. It felt heavy, but it felt good. The journey to the Blue Note Lounge felt like the longest walk of her life. The city streets were crowded. People were rushing home from work, heading to dinner, or going to movies. Everyone seemed to have a purpose. Sam felt like she was walking underwater. When she finally arrived at the lounge, it wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a big, scary concert hall. It was a basement place below a bookstore. There was a small sign with a blue light bulb flickering above a plain black glass door. She stood outside for a long time, listening to the muffled sound of a bass guitar thumping from inside. She could turn around now. She could go home. No one would know. She took a deep breath of the cool evening air and pulled the heavy glass door open. Inside, the air was thick and smelled like wood polish and beer. It was dimly lit, with small round tables scattered around a low stage. There were about 30 people there, sipping drinks and talking in low voices. At the back of the stage, bathed in a single spotlight, sat a piano. It was beautiful. It was glossy black, and it looked like it was made of black glass. It was everything the diner piano wasn't. Sam walked to the bar. Her legs felt like jelly. I'm I'm here for the open mic, she whispered to the bartender. The bartender was a big guy with a beard. He didn't look up from the glass he was polishing. You sign up? Sam hesitated. Not yet. List is on the wall by the stage. You got 5 minutes before sign up closes. Sam walked toward the stage. Her stomach was doing flip-flops. She could see a clipboard hanging on the wall. There were only a few names on it. Dave, guitar. Lisa, vocals. She stood in front of the clipboard. She held the pen. Her hand was shaking so much she could barely hold it. You don't have to do this, a voice in her head said. Go home. Be safe. But then she thought about the diner. She thought about the clattering plates. She thought about the feeling of the keys under her fingers on that dusty afternoon. She thought about the old man's kind eyes. She wrote her name. Sam, piano. As soon as she wrote it, her heart nearly stopped. It was done. There was no going back now. She found a small table in the very back corner, in the shadows, and sat down. She ordered a water just to have something to hold onto. The first act, a guy named Dave, played acoustic guitar. He was good. He played fast and everyone clapped. Then Lisa sang. She had a beautiful, powerful voice. Sam watched them, and the fear inside her grew. These people were good. They were real performers. Sam was just a waitress. What was she doing here? Next up, we have Sam, the host announced into the microphone. The name echoed through the speakers. Sam felt like she couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred for a second. She stood up. Her knees were shaking so badly she thought she might fall. She walked toward the stage. It felt like walking to her execution. The lights were blindingly bright. She couldn't see the audience anymore, just a wall of darkness. She sat on the bench at the grand piano. It smelled like lemon wax and expensive wood. Her hands hovered over the keys. They were trembling uncontrollably. She couldn't do this. She was going to forget the notes. She was going to humiliate herself. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the feeling from the diner. She tried to find that quiet place inside herself where the music lived. Then, she heard a noise. A polite cough from the audience. They were waiting. Sam took a deep, shuddering breath. She pressed her foot down on the pedal. She lowered her hands. She wasn't thinking about rent anymore. She wasn't thinking about the landlord or the dishes. She was just thinking about the song. Her fingers touched the keys. A single low note rang out, clear and deep. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She began to play. The sound that came out of the instrument was nothing like the clunky, tinny noise of the diner piano. This was a deep, rich, velvety voice that filled the entire room. The vibration traveled up the keyboard, through the bench, and into Sam's bones. For a second, she was terrified. The silence in the room was absolute. She couldn't hear anyone breathing, coughing, or whispering. She felt like she was standing on a ledge, exposed and vulnerable. She had decided to play an old jazz standard, a slow ballad about lost love and finding your way home. It was a song her mother loved. She started slow. Her left hand plotted out the bass notes, steady and grounding. Her right hand was shaking at first, making the melody sound a little jagged and unsure. Don't think about the people, she told herself. Don't think about being a waitress. Just play. She closed her eyes tight. She imagined she was back in that corner of the diner, but this time the trays were gone. The sticky floor was gone. It was just her and the music. About 30 seconds in, something shifted. The fear didn't go away completely, but it moved to the back of her mind. Her fingers remembered what they were made for. They stopped trembling. They found a rhythm. The melody smoothed out, flowing like water over stones. She hit a difficult run of notes, a fast little trill that usually tripped her up, and she nailed it. The sound rang out clear and bright. Sam felt a jolt of electricity go through her chest. It was a feeling more potent than any coffee, stronger than any adrenaline. It was pure joy. She began to play louder, putting more force into the keys. The piano responded, booming and powerful. She wasn't just reading notes on a page, she was telling a story. She was pouring all those lonely nights, all those sore feet, all those days of feeling invisible, into the song. She let the music carry her anger and her sadness, and the instrument turned it into something beautiful. Under the spotlight, it was hot, a bead of sweat rolled down Sam's temple, but she didn't wipe it away. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, her body loose and relaxed for the first time in years. She wasn't Sam the waitress anymore. She was a musician. She was an artist. She didn't play anything fancy. No crazy fast solos or complicated classical techniques. She just played with feeling. She let the notes hang in the air, lingering on the sad ones, racing through the happy ones. It was simple, honest, and raw. As she neared the end of the song, she slowed down. She played the final chorus softly, her fingers barely pressing the keys, drawing out a whisper-quiet sound that made everyone in the room lean in. She could feel the audience now. They weren't judging her. They were with her. She could feel their attention like a warm blanket. She reached the last chord. She took a deep breath and played it with both hands, letting it ring out fully. It was a rich, satisfying harmony that seemed to suspend time. She held her hands on the keys, letting the sound fade into nothingness, waiting until the very last vibration of the string had died away in the air. Then, she lifted her hands and placed them in her lap. The silence lasted for maybe 2 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. Sam opened her eyes, blinking against the bright lights. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst. Did I mess up? Did they hate it? Then, a sound broke the silence. It was the clapping of hands. At first, it was just one person, maybe the old man in the back. Then it was 2 people. Then, suddenly, the whole room erupted. It wasn't a polite, quiet golf clap. It was loud, robust applause. A man near the front whistled through his fingers. Someone shouted, "Yeah!" Sam sat there on the bench, stunned. Her face flushed hot with a mix of shock and relief. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, and this time, it wasn't a fake customer service smile. It was a real, toothy, goofy grin. She stood up. Her legs felt wobbly, like jelly, but she managed to stand straight. She gave a small, awkward bow. She didn't know what to do with her hands, so she just waved them a little. The lights made it hard to see, but she thought she saw a familiar figure in the back, an older man in a tweed jacket, clapping the hardest. She walked off the stage, her sneakers squeaking on the wooden floor. As soon as she stepped into the shadows of the wings, she leaned against the wall and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 10 years. "Hey, that was beautiful," a voice whispered nearby. It was the girl with the guitar, Lisa. "You really feel it, don't you?" Sam just nodded, unable to speak yet. Her throat was tight with unshed tears. She felt light, incredibly light. Like she could float up to the ceiling. The heavy weight that she carried on her shoulders every single day, the weight of bills, expectations, and fear was gone. It had been left there on the piano bench. She walked back into the main room, but instead of going to her corner table, she walked toward the bar. She ordered a soda, but this time she didn't hide in the shadows. She stood near the front where she could see the stage. Throughout the night, people came up to her. A guy with a beard told her she had great timing. A woman asked her how long she had been playing. "I used to play a long time ago," Sam found herself saying. "I'm just getting back into it." The words felt strange in her mouth, but also true. When the night wound down and people started to leave, Sam gathered her things. She walked outside into the cool night air. The city was quieter now. The street lights cast long yellow reflections on the wet pavement. She didn't run to the bus stop this time. She walked slowly. She looked at her hands as she walked. They were still the same hands, rough, red, and short-nailed. They were the hands of a woman who worked hard for a living. But as she flexed her fingers, she knew they were more than that now. She was still going to have to go to work tomorrow. She would still have to serve the soup and refill the coffee. The rent was still due. The world hadn't magically changed because she played a song. But she had changed. As she waited at the bus stop, she hummed the melody she had played earlier. It was stuck in her head, but in a good way. It was like a friend walking beside her. She pulled the yellow flyer out of her pocket, looked at it one last time, and carefully folded it up. She put it in her wallet, right behind her ID. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She had found a piece of herself that she thought was lost forever, and she wasn't going to let it go again. The bus pulled up, its doors hissing open. Sam climbed on, paid her fare, and sat by the window, watching the city lights blur by, ready for whatever came next.